In this video, we're going to do multivariate logistic regression, and we'll have more than one independent variable for our one categorical dependent variable. We're going to extend the example from the bivariate, and in addition to using the variable political views, we're also going to use race and socioeconomic status. I'm going to pause here for a second. The race variable here in the general social survey that we have, I'm going to come up right here so that we can come over here and check out our values. IAP, white, black, or other, that's a form of missing right there. And as I always like to point out, and as I will point out in class, this method of categorization of this concept of race is fraught with many difficulties, in my opinion, and it in a sense, marginalizes the other, no matter how we want to think about the concept of other, and a lot of other things like that. But this is the way that the data is here for us, and we're going to use it because that's the example in your textbook. But this is not, we want these variables, they need to be dummied out in a sense. They need to be turned into dummy variables. And because our hypothesis is African Americans are more likely to own guns than white Americans, we need to create a dummy variable in which black is the category of existence, and so that gets the 1 in the dummy variable, and then other characteristics get the 0. So 1 dummy variable for black, and then 1 dummy variable for other, and we'll make then white be the one that's off to the side on that. We can go into a long discussion of dummy variables in class if we choose to, but in the example in your textbook, the authors are having SPSS do all of this for you. Instead, I'm going to ask you to actually calculate your own, recode your own dummy variables. So you're going to need 2 of them. In the textbook, the automated process creates 2 variables. One is called race1, which is the equivalent of a dummy variable for black, with 1 being black, 0 being anything that's not black, and race2, which is 1 being other and anything else being 0 in that variable. So you're going to create 2 dummy variables. One will be called black and one will be called other before we even get started. And I'm sure that you remember how to do this, where you're going to recode into a different variable. You'll probably want to do a quick frequencies by race first and a few things like that. I am not going to go into recoding those variables in this particular video. I'm just going to trust that you have done it by the time all is said and done. It is done in my data set here. So we have 0 for all else and 1 is black, and here for other it's the same thing, 0 for all else, 1 for other. So I can use those variables now in my multivariate logistic regression. The 2 other variables in use here are political views, so that's our scale from 1 to 7, and socioeconomic status, which is also a scaled variable. Higher values indicate higher social status. Like any good analysis process, we're going to churn out a few descriptive statistics first, just to make sure that we've, the variables are what we think they are. And the one that I'm still missing here is SEI, which I need to find back up here a little ways. There we go. All right, so we have all of those, and I'm just going to say OK. And because the socioeconomic index is a true continuous variable, ranges through quite a few variables. That's a pretty big table. I probably didn't really need to do that. I don't have that many missings, which is nice, but I see that my range here is from 17 to 92 roughly. Here's our other, all else, so 9% other, 13.9% black, and a repeat of our political views and a repeat of our have gun and home. All that stuff would be useful if drawing up a full analysis of our questions at hand here. We're trying to answer these basic hypotheses. Political conservatives are more likely to own guns than liberals. African Americans are more likely to own guns than white Americans. And hypothesis number 3, gun ownership is least prevalent among those highest in the socioeconomic scale and most common among those at the lower levels. It's an interesting combination of examples of hypotheses, probably designed to have ones that some that you are able to show are the case and some that you are not able to support. All right, so we've taken care of our dummy variables now. So the portions of your text on page 199 are going to be a little bit different, and you might want to write those steps down as we do this in class. We're going to do analyze, regression, binary, logistic. I'm leaving that at own gun. I'm leaving Paul views there, but I'm going to go ahead and insert my black and insert my other and insert my socioeconomic status from wherever it is. There it is. Okay, I do not need to deal with the categorical options, which would have me convert the race variable. You are welcome to go ahead and do it that way after you've done it this way, just so you can see that the result is basically the same thing when you're done. All right, so I'm just going to say OK. And there we go, all my results, and they match up with what's in the text. So that's what you're looking for, is something that looks pretty much just like this, except you won't have the section on categorical variables coding because we didn't do that. We did our own variables. So in the textbook, it's political views and then race, race 1, race 2. And with race itself not actually being included in the equations, race 1 is the equivalent of this one we've called black, race 2 is the equivalent of this one we've called other, and then there's socioeconomic status. So interpretation here is pretty much like it was with bivariate logistic regression, except that your equation is going to be a little bit longer and a little bit more complicated. So you're going to have more than one variable laid out here. So that is on page 201 of your text, using multiple variable logistic regression coefficients to make predictions. So this is how you're going to work out that equation so that you can, 1, show your logistic regression equation, and 2, make predictions based on various characteristics. The example in your text takes a very liberal white person with average socioeconomic status. So by average, I think they were essentially, I don't really know, given that long spiel of options for the socioeconomic status. We can probably figure out a few different ways to deal with that. The interesting thing is that I would not want to include socioeconomic status in a predictive equation. And would you like to know why I would not do that, even though they do it in your text? Because the variable is not significant here. So the first thing that my table tells me is that political views and race are significant. They do explain variance that is statistically significant, but socioeconomic index here doesn't at all, not one bit, which to me means you probably don't want to include it, but whatever. So here's your betas for working out your equation, and this is to help you better interpret at 1.270 odds, essentially. Your odds here and odds there. It's the significant value for race tells us the odds of gun ownership for the 3 race categories are significantly different, but it doesn't tell us which ones. So in the example of the book, it just tells us about that general variable race, which we're not using. With the black and the other, what we see here is that African Americans are 0.286 times as likely to own a gun as whites. That means about a quarter as likely as whites. So our hypothesis that African Americans were more likely to own guns, totally shot down completely there. Likewise, if you are something other than African American or white, your odds of owning a gun are even less than that if you're African American, and are way less than that if you are white. So that's how you interpret those odds. You are for each increment in this political views variable, your odds of owning a gun goes up 1.27. So obviously the more conservative, the more likely you are to own a gun. So we do support that hypothesis, and we cannot support the hypothesis about socioeconomic status because that is not statistically significant. So I'm not going to do the spreadsheet process of working out that equation. That's something that I'm going to ask that each of you work on yourself using the equations in your text and a spreadsheet or a pencil and a piece of paper or a calculator or however you want to go about doing that for right now. But that is multivariate logistic regression.